It was certainly a landmark to commercial use of Linux. It was really hard to use Linux commercially before 1.0.
Toivotan teidät tervetulleeksi tähän Linux-käyttöjärjestelmän julkistamistilaisuuteen.
Miksi tämmöistä Unixia ollenkaan tehdään, varsinkin tämmöisessä yliopistoympäristössä, on se, että niitä kyllä on olemassa PC-koneillekin, mutta niiden hintataso on erittäin korkea. Eli kun esimerkiksi DOSin ostaa kotikoneeseen 200 markalla, niin tuommoinen Unix-kotikoneeseen maksaa helposti 20 000 markkaa, mikä on opiskelijalle hiukan liian paljon. Menkää vaikka jonnekin tietokonekauppaan, niin kysykää, että onko teillä SCU Unix, niin ne katsoo teitä kysyen ja sanoo, että ei, emme itse. Itse asiassa paljon helpompi kirjoittaa siitä.
The development process of Linux is odd. It is not a hierarchy where everyone is free to suggest and send changes to the code. There's one person who leads, makes the big decisions, and chooses the best ideas. Linus, the benevolent dictator.
Everyone knew that someone had to be the head of this work group, and Linus was the natural head given that he did the original core Linux kernel, and Linus was someone who was a very, very good leader. He's someone who's actually quite humble. You know, he doesn't try to take credit for stuff that he doesn't do.
You want to have hundreds, thousands of people working on the kernel at the same time, but you don't want to have all these people stepping on each other's toes all the time, because that way you will just get, most of the time will be spent on just resolving conflicts between people. You just have flame wars all the time. I used to think that it was this hierarchy where I was at the top and they were my lieutenants, and I don't think it's that way anymore. It's more like a web of trust where I have people I trust and they have people they trust.
Well, there are lots of things that motivate developers. There's artistic pride, the satisfaction that you get from doing good craftsman-like work. There's the idealist feeling of being something larger and part of something larger and more important than you are. There's a desire to help the world and see good solutions happen. In the absence of monetary rewards, most people, most of the time, are playing for a kind of reputation reward among their peers.
One strength of the Linux development world is that practically every software author can be contacted directly by email. Ted Tso was crucial in the spread of Linux in the United States.
To be fair, it's very easy to say, if we were in charge, we wouldn't do these things. But then again, we're not getting all these email messages saying, please, let me add this new feature. And so I don't know what I would actually do if I were really in charge.
Dave Miller is a maintainer who reviews changes that developers want to make in the kernel. He's like a funnel between the contributors and the King Linus.
The way that we work is you can talk all day about a great idea or a solution to a problem or something that you think is an interesting feature for Linux to have. But you've got to show me something concrete. Show me a piece of code that does that. So something that's tangible that I can test myself so that I can try it out and I can think about what it is instead of just talking abstractly about a topic all day.
Alan Cox, a Renaissance hacker, is the closest collaborator to Linus, his right-hand man.
To me, code has more in common with, for example, poetry or some kinds of writing. And the beauty of it is in structure, in putting ideas across one at a time in a clear way. So a good piece of code you can read without comments, and it's immediately obvious why it's been written, how it's elegant. And so you're looking for code which is both clean and elegant, but also doesn't rely on clever programming tricks, doesn't make assumptions which may not be true in the future. Because the last thing we want to do is to have much code in the Linux kernel which requires large amounts of effort to keep it working. We want code which will just continue to work and work forever.
Having led the Linux project for 5 years in Helsinki, Linus was recruited to Silicon Valley, California. He wanted to see the other side of the world of commerce, not just the academic side.
You're quite an unorthodox figure in the Silicon Valley world. What do they make of you there? You've not taken the crazy commercial path, if you like.
Feel like a king of America. Southbound Redwood Parkway. The weather's quite like the Antarctica. You're never alone in Silicon Valley, USA. Seems I was the chosen prodigy, writing for the sonnets by Shakespeare. Some sort of alchemy, we couldn't even get near. And they didn't inherit the earth. The geeks, we found the wealth, we probably sell the shares as soon as you can. Get out and go on to the next thing. Retire young, should have been the king of America. The weather's quite like the Antarctica. Southbound Redwood Parkway.
Linus started to work for a company called Transmeta. Not a Linux company, but a mysterious business that didn't want to tell for many years what it was up to. And paradoxically, a closed source code company. The deal was that Linus could still concentrate on developing Linux.
I have been forced into trying to be a kind of poster boy for Linux. And actually the whole open source community at large, even though I wasn't even the person who started open source.
There's no single person that represents the whole story, and there's no single starting point. I mean, it's like the bamboo. You don't know where it starts, where it ends.
I don't think that this movement is actually new at all. It's been around for a long time. You know, even in the 70s, you know, the whole attitude that we had around Unix, even though technically it wasn't open source, it wasn't free, because you did need to go and get this license from AT&T, but you know, since that was not an issue generally, you could share things freely.
When you run a program, typically you run the executable form, which is a series of numbers. Now, nobody can make any sense of those numbers. Only a computer can understand them. That's what they're for. Those numbers are the form of a program that the computer itself can understand. But for humans to figure out what they mean is very hard. When we write software, we write it as source code. Source code looks sort of like algebra. That's the form that you can understand if you're a programmer. To help you figure out, there are usually lots and lots of comments, which are explanations that are put into the source code to help other people figure out why the program is written the way it is. If you get just the executables, which is what Microsoft will probably give you, even if you had the freedom to make changes, you could never figure out what changes to make. It's too hard. For the freedom to change the software to be practical and usable, you've got to have the source code.
If you really look at the project, if you really look at as I said, Linus developed the kernel, but the whole system is really not. I think that the most interesting part here is really Richard Stallman began the movement.
Have you heard of Richard Stallman?
He wanted everyone to have the rights to use the software, to copy the software without breaking any laws, to make changes, distribute them, enhance it, right? He wanted to give people rights.
When he decided to overthrow corrupt American capitalism in the computer industry, he quit his job and he continued coding.